Welcome to another episodes of Soul Connections. I'm Emily.
I'm Dani.
I'm Aryn.
Soul Connections is a podcast about enchanting relationships with the human, more than human, and divine. We invite you to gather with us as the sun makes their annual pilgrimage through the zodiac. Each month, we'll bring you Astro Church sermons and illuminating conversations with radiant guests. Together, we'll make meaning out of the mystery through archetypes, patterns, and storytelling. Today is February 24th, 2025, and we have another interview segment for you today. We are so excited for our community and listeners to meet our special guest. You may already know her, but our special guest is Roxanne Hanna Ramirez, and she uses she, her pronouns. Roxanne goes by Rox for short, so you might hear us say Rox on the podcast today. She is a first-generation millennial farmer, writer, and parent living north of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. She specializes in growing herbs for Winterspring CSA, which is short for Community-Supported Agriculture. She writes the farm newsletter and is writing her debut novel, Ascendant Seed. When not working, Rox enjoys foraging, going to shows, and playing with her toddler and dog. Welcome, Rox, to the Soul Connections podcast.
Thank you so much. I can't believe that it's happening. I'm all aflutter. Thank you for that intro. That was lovely.
Of course. Well, to get us started, because astrology is such a huge thread of this podcast, and we will be looking at your chart later in the interview, will you please share your sun, moon, and rising sign with us?
Yes, I am a Cancer sun through and through. Also Gemini moon, and I recently found out via you all and through my newly acquired birth certificate that I am an Aquarius rising.
Very exciting. So excited to dive into your chart. And I'm going to hand it over to Dani to start our interview today.
Yeah. So, Rox, fundamental question. What lights you up?
So I thought about this question a lot when it was handed to me, and what I came out with is the process of humans finding their niche back in the ecosystem where they live, and that looks different, of course, compared to different parts of the world. But in farming, that seems very self-explanatory, right? Because we're directly interacting with the ecosystem for food. But there's lots of other ways of doing that too, and I'm excited to explore some of those, especially relating to astrology, while I'm here today.
What role do you see humans serving within ecosystems and the web of life?
So my thoughts about this are based on a lot of good work and some problematic work when it comes to archaeology and things like that. We have to be real about the history of how a lot of our archaeological knowledge exists today. But some of that is informed by how people participated in the coevolution of ecologies, and there's examples from the Amazon rainforest with something called terra preta, which are these huge deposits of super dark, rich black soil that are dispersed in different areas throughout the Amazon rainforest that helped kick off the major biodiversity of the region. And when excavated and studied, they found that these were human created, basically trash pits of compost and broken pottery and woven materials and bones from the animals they were eating and cooking, things like that. And we don't see that today looking at the Amazon rainforest, and people often a lot of times are removed from those, the indigenous folks are removed from those ecosystems, and the ecosystems suffer. Another example would be the Lakota tribes, and how, conventionally we say like, oh, these lands were unmanaged, they were wild, and they were just following around the herds of buffalo, when actually they were basically like rotationally grazing on a much larger scale, right? And then, also managing those landscapes with fire. So those are just two examples. And there are people that know a lot more about this who could talk in depth about every ecosystem, and like how in the last 300,000 years and before we were Homo sapiens sapiens even, we were a part of that coevolutionary process. And fundamentally, like, we are the same beings as those ancestors who participated in those processes, except now our same behaviors are being capitalized on, industrialized. We're not just creating giant mounds of compost that get untenable, so we move on and then it breaks down. We're creating landfills. We're creating oceans full of garbage. Like, we're still doing the same things, but it's not within relation to the ecosystem.
Yeah, Rox, I wanted to chime in. I'm reading this book right now, and it's really related to what you said about humans' role within the wider ecosystem, which I think is incredibly misunderstood, like you shared. And I'm reading Mirrors in the Earth by Asia Suler. She's a herbalist you might be aware of. But and she's talking about how, right, like indigenous people for millennia, right, like they have been in intentional, beautiful relationships with the earth. And she's talking about like gardening, and actually like that stewardship, that relationship is so needed to support like biodiversity, and just the flourishing of the ecosystem. And actually humans have a really big role to play. And so I just wanted to chime in, because I feel like in conservation, right, like you shared, there is sometimes the ideology of like, let nature just be nature, and let it rewild, when really historically, like you said, like what the archaeology shows us, what indigenous people are saying, is actually, it's this co-creative relationship. And so I just wanted to kind of affirm that, as that's something on my own personal journey I'm learning more about, and that actually we are a part of nature. And so I'm curious, like, where, like, your personal role in the ecosystem that like you're living in, and what is that like hands-on relationship like for you, and what that has been like figuring that out.
That's something that is an ongoing relationship, an ongoing figuring out, I think. And I've been working in the food industry and growing food in both urban and rural settings for the last 13 years. And that has, the context of that has changed many times. I've worked in, different places, from where I grew up in central Illinois to up in the Great Lakes region. I've had the opportunity to travel and work and study with mentors in different areas in the United States. And it's always changing, but I'm always surprised, no matter how heartbreaking the circumstances, no matter how whatever, the deal is when going from one farm to another farm, whether you're choosing it or not, there's always a big shift. Like, there's always kind of a grieving process. And then there's also like, oh, like the ground is still here. Like, it's still the earth. It's just like a different little piece of the face of the earth, but like still there, and the plants that are still there in different quantities or behaving differently on a different site. Like, they're still the same plants that you've encountered before. And once you know them, and there's always more to get to know about that individual plant as well. But as far as my specific role, I think that it's not unique, and it shouldn't be as unique as it is sometimes. But just the process, they say that farming, like good, like traditional styles of farming, is basically just moving nutrients around. So whether you're moving poop around, or whether you're moving food out of the field, whether you're composting, all that stuff is just moving things around. So that is what I like to say that I do. And throughout that process, they in permaculture design, which we can talk about in a little bit, but one of the common idioms is to observe and interact. So as you're moving things, you might do it differently if you observe that something had a reaction that you weren't expecting. So yeah, just moving stuff around and observing and reacting with what happens.
I love that. How did you get to that specific realization that that's your role? Were there pivotal experiences or teachers that you had that helped you realize that that's like a role that you feel good embodying in local ecosystems?
Absolutely. There's been so many people and so many opportunities that have informed what I hope to achieve in farming and in just what that looks like in relationship to the land. And that ranges from, I was trying to sit down and make a list before we started. It's a really long list. So I'm just going to name like the ones that I've spent the most time with. But I actually was into mycology and mushroom farming before I got into vegetables and herbs. So Fungi for the People out in Pacific Northwest, they do really great intensive, like 2-week trainings for growing gourmet and medicinal mushrooms. Also radical mycology. I've done some workshops with them. And the things like the radical mycology convergence and things like that just really radicalized me in farming, like early on, in terms of this like skill sharing and making things as accessible and replicable as possible. So it's not just about, having the most perfect, pristine farm, having the most whatever farm to get a book deal, and then just like, say this is the one true way. I think that being able to spend, a couple months to a few weeks on a lot of different farms through the Wolf program, which again, I also comes with some cautionary tales on that, but it can be helpful if you're thinking of it as like a vacation and not staying, at certain places for a long time that can't or sometimes won't pay you for your work. And I have spent a lot of time with my mentor, Charlie. So I should expand that. While, yes, I specialize in herbs and the veggies and the CSA, and that's what we do. That's what pays the bills. I also am kind of like a Gemini mind in terms of like, I'm always looking at all the different aspects of farming, and it's so expansive between, getting into arborism and getting into insect farming. Sometimes I've had red wiggler bins for long periods of time. And that's kind of what makes it fun. I will always be finding, more mentors. And as of late, I did the online training through Regenerative Agriculture Alliance. A lot of those materials that were created by Rehi Haslett-Marroquin, really brilliant poultry farmer, and doing a lot to make agroforestry like a realistic system for people who don't have independent wealth to throw at something that takes 10 to 15 years to produce, like planting trees, unfortunately, but it's something we have to do. So when we put the chickens underneath the canopy of trees, we get the trees established. We also get an annual harvest of really nutrient-dense foods of that tree range chicken, as we call it. I also have Cal Anderson. I can give him a shout out in the Driftless area, Wisconsin based. Has a very diverse vineyard and sells a lot of nursery stock for interesting varieties that will reasonably fruit in our temperate climate in Zone 5 in Wisconsin. And I gotta shout out Keith Morris. Like, that's the thing. I don't want to take up too much time, but I can keep going. Keith Morris through the Prospect Rock Permaculture in Vermont did a 2-week program there on mostly like design and farm planning and things like that. I also benefited a lot from One Straw Revolution, a book by Masanobu Fukuoka, way back in the day when I was first getting into farming, and it's an equal farming and philosophy book. So it's like reading a memoir sort of, but you're also learning about farming. And yes, I spent 3 months right after I graduated high school, touring and staying and working on farms that were influenced by Masanobu Fukuoka's work. So that was a huge honor. Some Japanese farmers out there that I got to stay with, like a 4-generation old shiitake farm, things like that are just always threads through everything that I do now. There's also been a lot of time spent in like an 8-month herbal certification and lots of other hosting workshops and stuff. And unfortunately, there are mentors that are part of my lineage that I can't, at this point, in good conscience, send people to, because things change over time and some things come to light, and you realize while there can be benefits to something, while you can learn something, sometimes you learn what to do, sometimes you learn what not to do, all those sorts of things. At the end of the day, it's always the right mentors are always going to tell you that it's your relationship with the plants, it's your journey. Like, mentors are people and they can be imperfect. And at the same time, we all have to take responsibility for ourselves. And when we're in a situation, as can happen and has happened in a WWOOF type scenario or a volunteer type scenario or an internship type scenario that are very common in farming, you can find yourself in a really unhealthy situation when you're coming from a place of like desperately seeking knowledge and experience in an area that's very hard to break into. You can find yourself putting up with things that, you know, you shouldn't. And so that's something that I do talk to beginning and aspiring farmers about, is like, I don't know that I would send my kid out to do the same thing that I did. You know, I don't know that I can say like that the path that I've taken is like perfect or would work for everyone. But fortunately, we're looking at a little bit better of a situation these days where we have, more focus on accredited apprenticeship programs and a lot more knowledge and awareness around paying people more equitably. Like, just because we're exempt, from minimum wage as agricultural workers doesn't mean that we should be getting paid $500 a month to work 50 hours a week, like, which is something that we've done, So yeah, that's a really long-winded answer, but I hope that covers it.
Rox, I love how like real you are about farming. I've had some conversations with you because I am on the path of seeing agriculture in my future, and I just love how real you are. Your chart is lighting up for me. When you're talking about all your different influences, all the different teachers that you've had, from, the radical mushroom growers, to the herbal teachers, to the agroforestry. And I'm curious because I know that I am always I'm trying to learn about farming. And so some of these terms are familiar to me, but I wanted to see for our listeners who might not be as familiar with agriculture or ecology, if you would be willing to, I know agroforestry is something you're very passionate about. If you would be willing to define that, and then same with permaculture, just to give folks, like, what do those terms mean to you in your practice?
Yeah, so I'll be perfectly honest. The term permaculture is just basically a made-up term by a white man who wrote a book in the 80s that based these methodologies of farming that have existed and have traditional roots in indigenous cultures throughout the world. Basically just kind of rebranding it and putting it together in a textbook that is in English that, took off for a long time. There's a lot of people doing, some important work in the permaculture communities and things, but it's also earned itself the nickname spermaculture because it can be extremely white male dominated and a lot of times does not credit cultures and communities with their farming practices. That's something that I did appreciate, at least from Keith Morris's course out at Prospect Rock. And, he is a white cis man and teaching in this role and working through the university and things like that. But he did bring in indigenous farmers and folks to actually speak about their own practices and share them with us in a way that, and that was in 2015 or something like that. So we can still do a lot better looking forward, especially. But that is a world that I came up in and that I learned about things and benefited from in a lot of ways. And at the same time needs a lot of work and is ready to either evolve seriously or just kind of be left in terms of like, that was that thing and these are the problems with it. And how do we center immigrant and indigenous BIPOC farmers going forward, rightfully so, with giving credit where credit is due. So that's permaculture. Sorry to kind of rip it apart, but and then what was the other half of that? Agroforestry. Yeah, so agroforestry is just a very clinical term for incorporating diverse food systems that are based on tree crops. So tree crops can be fruits, can be nuts. Most of the time that's what it is. But there's also elements of incorporating trees that are fast growing with high BTUs. So they make good fuel or they make good lumber. There's lots of different things that we can harvest from an agroforestry system that is diverse. So we're not talking about almond monoculture in California. We're talking about interplantings with different layers of the canopy going on. A lot of times there's animals incorporated in those systems because that's how plants evolved, with animals as the nutrient cyclers of that system. So that would also be, whether it's chicken based or, people run cattle and hogs through agroforestry systems. There's a lot of different ways that it can physically look on the landscape. But at the end of the day, it's just like farming with trees.
Beautiful.
Can I just say something? I've known you for a while, and I've known you mostly through political circles and stuff like that. And this new discovery of your Aquarius rising is just makes so much sense and is so obvious now that we know this. And you said something earlier, and it just really defines for me what I feel from you, which is you said, your role is not unique in my perspective. You said, I'm not unique in my perspective. Traditional farming is just moving nutrients around. And I feel like that just is such an Aquarius place to be. And that is the place that you have filled, which is this is being done because it needs to be done, because this is the system that makes the most sense. And it's what makes the most sense. And it's I'm not special. I don't stand out. I'm a part of the group. But really, there is, an element of having a vision and being able to enact that vision. That's just very aqua energy to me. And so I just want to honor that because Pluto's in Aquarius right now. We just came out of Aquarius season. There is, so this aqua rising thing for you makes so much sense. And I'm just really excited to look at your chart.
It really cracks me up. It really cracks me up too, because I hear some of the things that I'm saying, and a lot of my mentors have been Aquarius placements. So it does make a lot of, it's like, okay, of course. Yeah.
We're just moving nutrients around. That's all we're doing. It just makes more sense this way.
Yeah. Poop in, food out.
Yeah.
Nothing to see here.
I love it. And I love how your Gemini moon really like simplifying things. Like I feel like the Aquarian nature that you have is like you have a really complex understanding of these food webs, food systems, like the technicalities of your profession, of your path. And then you're really able to like make it accessible. Like agroforestry is like farming with trees, right? Like that's very Gemini moon to me of like, here's this technical, like very well thought out and intentional system that's very Aquarian, and it's very, rooted in like history. And then, Gemini moon is going to be like, and for folks who really don't know anything about farming, it's farming with trees. So I just wanted to point that out. And we're not diving into your chart yet, but we're just giving the listeners a little hints, right? Like we already know Rox's big three: Cancer, Sun, Gemini, Moon, Aquarius rising. And you can already start to see how like those aspects of her are really shining through her experiences. So Rox, we've heard so much about all your amazing teachers and just like all these different roads you've taken that have really led you to where you are today in this moment. And so, one of the roles that you play right now is being a farmer for Winterspring Farm, which I will proudly proclaim. My husband and I are like Winterspring fangirls. Like we love Winterspring Farm. So
yeah, you show a lot of love at Farmers Market. I appreciate it.
We do. We are blessed to be getting a share in the Winter Spring CSA this coming season, and I am so excited. So will you tell us about Winter Spring Farm and like just that journey and just like your relationship to the farm and really the farm also as the land and the ecosystem, really weaving in those threads that we've been talking about is you as a human and your relationship to the ecosystem that is Winter Spring.
Yeah. So, I mean, like I said, like the things that specifically that I'm doing or whatever are not like really special, but I do think what is really special and unique is that, we have been so blessed with like a gift of cheap rent. Yeah. So, cheap rent and or just like access to land through the nonprofit system. So the land that we're on currently has been an organic farm for over 40 years. It was founded in the 80s, I think 84, by a woman named Marianne Ime, who still lives on the property to this day. And it was founded as a teaching farm, and my husband got not his first farming experience, but his first like organic farming experience here as an intern in 2011 or something like that. And then went off farming himself, came back as a farm manager a few years later. And I followed shortly behind, and we were working for the nonprofit, doing skill sharing workshops, farmer interns, learning ourselves all through that time, doing a lot of things because there was no one else to do them for as cheap as we were willing to do them too. And I learned a lot about, there's a lot of upsides and challenges to operating as a nonprofit, especially within the farming industry. But because of those major, those programs meant something to a lot of people, and it meant something to us, certainly. And a community, was built that we came into and that we also had a part in building. And in 2020, things took a turn. We lost our one major funder, and there was a lot of conflict and strife within the organization itself, from scarcity, from conflict that was going unresolved, all these things. And it was decided by the board at that time to discontinue Wellspring as an operating nonprofit and to lay off all the staff, which was devastating to us because it was that situation that so many beginning and new farmers who don't own land that are in, where you're putting in all of the sweat equity and you have no claim to it. And, you know, in an instant, it's gone. And wasn't the first time we've been in that situation, but it was the first time that we've like invested so heavily in a place, in a farm, and in a community. But, you know, the saving grace was that they offered us an incubator farm opportunity. So they did a lot. They leased the space out to us to farms. If we formed an LLC, it's $400 a month, which is like unheard of in this economy. So that's very real. And that's an opportunity that is so rare, for farmers to come by in a lease situation. They also supported us in providing funds for continuing education. So they've paid for us to go to conferences, things like that. They paid for me to take the 80-hour training for regenerative poultry. So it was a big pivot for sure. And there was a lot of grieving, I think, on all sides for the loss of Wellspring as it was. And now it's being administered by River Edge Nature Center. They've been amazing to us. They have not raised our rent. They've honored our contracts. And our goal then was to take this as something that can exist out in the world, in a place that we can build equity and that we can ensure that we can farm long term. Because to be honest, you know, once we get into our 30s and things, you only have so many years of farming in you. And if you don't get to a place where you can control a lot of those variables, a lot of those land leasing contracts and things like that, it's really hard to stay in. It's really hard to justify putting in all of that. So, and especially trying to do agroforestry. What are you going to do? Like you plant trees. I planted so many trees that who knows what happens to them because, you know, I'm not there. I'm not able to be there to take care of them, water them and mow and mulch and all those sorts of things. So in order to really do the type of farming we wanted to do, we knew we needed to find land. We also ended up really lucking out by having this platform at Wellspring and being able to practice our skills and put it out there that like, okay, this is something we can do. Because the people who we bought the land from were retired farmers and they saw that. They were aware of our business. They were aware of us as people. We used to buy chicken and beef and stuff from them back in the day. So they gave us a very good deal on the land that they subdivided off of their house. So, and I like to talk about this stuff. I like to talk about it very frankly. I like to talk about numbers. I like to take as many notes and information as I can and share it because a lot of people are looking for land access right now. I know Emily, like you've talked about that a lot, and Dani, like we've talked about that too. And a lot of people are in a position of trying to wrap their head around how to do this. So I'm just trying to share everything that I know. And right now we're testing a theory that we can buy land that's the agricultural like scale. So it's 28 acres. So we can actually do a CSA. We can actually have a farming business. That's raw agricultural land. So all of the infrastructure needs to be developed. But we are testing this theory that we're going to be able to pull it off. And with the things that we learn, we'll be able to help somebody else do the same. Because if you're trying to buy anything that has any infrastructure on it at all, it's incredibly expensive. No matter if I've seen 5 acres for over $500,000 because it's got a McMansion on it. And a lot of times the infrastructure is way overbuilt for what you need anyway. You don't need a milk barn if you're doing a vegetable CSA, and half the time it hasn't been maintained anyway. So I think that in terms of our this farm and our relation to it, our relationship to the land itself, I think that this land has been incredibly generous. At times it's felt incredibly nourishing. And certainly at this point, like, we're made of it. I mean, this is the longest period of time I've gone from eating so much of the food from one place. And certainly my kid is like made out of like his isotopes, and his bones are going to be matching whatever's here. But it's been a very wonderful place where we've been embraced. We've also had a lot of training wheels off, like lessons in terms of like 1,000-year flood and multiple droughts, every disease, every fungus, every pest, all that stuff, because it's been here for 40 years. So, and we're surrounded by 30 acres of woods that is maintained by River Edge. So we have this beautiful distillation of diversity, and of this land it's got hiking on. You can like go out there and really see something and really experience. There's endangered plant species as a part of this land too, and I'm not going to name what or where because I want to protect them too, but and it is public land, so it's a place for a lot of people to come and access. And a lot of people I have folks come up to me at the farmers market today and be like, I went to a summer camp there when I was a kid. That's with them forever. And anyone who's been here and has worked here and has lived here and has been a part of it in some way recognizes it. And the land that we're going to be transitioning to was conventional corn and soy rotation. It's between a many hundreds of acres of cornfield and Highway 41. And it's a different world. Like I said, it's the same face of the earth, but it is a very different ecology, and it needs us more than this land does. So I've been getting the message the last couple of years, especially as we slowly are in this transition process, that it's time for us to go. We need to wrap it up. We've learned a lot, and it's going to be a time for something next, a time for something new here on this land. And I don't know what that will be. I think River Edge is in the process of figuring that out. It's certainly, they certainly do a lot of great work, especially in the skill sharing realm. And they have great like children's programs. And I do hope that they will maintain this space as an opportunity for farmers still to have this incubator project. Because we desperately need more farmers. 1% of the population growing food is not going to cut it when this importation-based food system is rattled, as we've already seen over the last half a decade now. And I don't have the same answer of like everybody should farm and blah 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 blah, but 30% of people farming, that could produce a pretty stable food system and a good quality way of life for a lot of people. I imagine maybe I'm just in a bubble, but I feel like there's a lot of people who would like an opportunity to do this type of work. And so it's a matter of like, how do we clear the path for that? How do we organize on a larger level to help each other, to share resources, to leverage things like the FSA loan, the 1% beginning farmers loan that has half of our land that is carrying 45% of our debt for the land. Lots and lots of resources out there that I will share along. I just did a blog post on Substack that is it's sort of like a love letter to like beginning farmers, just trying to put together all my responses to these questions of, how did you get into farming? How do I get into farming? Which is what that question really is for most people. And the answer is, it depends. And it's just like with organizing in any community, it's going to be shaped by the people who show up. It's going to be shaped by the people who are fighting for it and are willing to organize for it. But yeah, I hope that answers that. I lost the thread there at some point.
That was just beautiful. When you were talking about, right, like you literally your child's body, right, like the isotopes of his body, right? I'm thinking his bones, the calcium in his bones, the minerals like in your child's body being of the land that you are so deeply a part of. To me, that is just poetry, and like really what I think a lot of humans, like, we've lost that connection. We've lost that relationship and connection to the land and the separation. So you've already really like talked about it, right? Like you're in this really big transition period, right? Like with the farm, with Winterspring, you're moving to new land, and you've really talked about, right, like local food systems and like the organizing required. And so I wanted to circle back and just maybe do another little definition here, because I also think it weaves in, because I think it's a really radical model. We've been throwing the word CSA around, and I did define it at the beginning, community supported agriculture. Could you tell, like, just to share with our listeners who may not be familiar with that, like, well, maybe why Winterspring chose a CSA model and what a CSA model is?
Sure. I will say that, well, okay, CSA is becoming a more heavily used acronym to describe childhood sexual assault. So that is a reason why I'm sort of moving away from it a bit, although it's very hard because it's like there's so many acronyms in the world, and like when you've built a lot of information around something, like this has been in decades, it's been used to describe farms that have a direct to consumer model. So we're growing a variety of different things that all complement each other. We put them together in a curated selection that goes out in a box to people that have a membership in our farm for that season. So that's your share. We like to, I use the term local vegetable subscription, which is basically what it is. So we have a 20-week season and we have different size options. You can get it every week or every other week. And it's really been consistently what people tell me. And I was a CSA member before I was a CSA farmer, but you get into this use it up mentality, which is how it is like when you are growing food. Like if you've ever even had a small garden, you realize like I'm growing more than I need for my household, and I either need to use it up, I need to do a batch processing, I've got something to bring to a potluck, I've got, you know, stuff to pass around and stuff to preserve. So you eat a lot of it because it's there. It's not very like, we didn't evolve being like, what is the thing that I want to eat? And then I'm going to go to the store and try to procure it. It's like, what's in front of me, what's fresh, what's good right now, and how do I figure out how to eat it? So a lot of our members, we try to shift towards that use it up, you know, mentality, and you end up being surprised, like how much of the greens you can go through and how much salad you can actually eat, and then really get good at, you know, we might have a couple signature dressings and a couple signature dishes that, you know, I kind of focus on as the parade of different vegetables changes throughout the season. But that's a CSA farm, and it's based on Dr. Carver's model, who was a Black American farmer in the early 20th century, mid 20th century. And it was very importantly created in order to offset the lack of access to funding that Black farmers could get. In that period, you know, it was like maybe after Jim Crow and stuff like that, but they were still being left out of all of these rural farm loans and things like that white farmers were able to get in order to buy their seed, buy their supplies, all that stuff before they're harvesting. This model allows the people who are going to be fed from that farm to front those costs. So they pay at the beginning of the season, pay for the amendments, the seeds, all that stuff, and then they receive back their share as the season progresses.
Can I jump back to something you were saying earlier that just made me think of something about you that I want to ask you about. You were talking about the use it up mentality, and the way you were talking about it was like maybe you'll develop signature dressings or like different ways of using things, and there's an element of creativity there, you know, and an element like one of the things as your friend and like community member, co-community member that I've seen you light up about is cooking and food, and you're a Cancer sun, you know. Can you just talk a little more about that, about your relationship with like cooking and what you do with food once it's in front of you?
That's such a sweet question, and my answer might bleed into future questions too. But I love cooking, as most people do. I love eating, and I started doing all of this stuff because in high school I read Eating Animals, and I was, you know, I was traumatized, along with probably many of our listeners who watched those slaughterhouse videos and the way that animals were being treated in these battery cages and stuff. Like in the early 2000s, those videos were making the rounds and just really making waves and impacting people deeply, especially within like our generation. So I had been a vegetarian from a very early age, and then I was vegan from like 15 or 16 on, and I started cooking my own food at that time because if I didn't cook it, then there were very few options. And then I started gardening because I realized like all this fresh ass fruit and vegetables is very expensive. And so and you know, it kind of like went on from there, but it was really my first full season in like a 1/4 acre sized garden at a school garden that I was managing at the time, that it all kind of hit me. And at that time I was wearing braces on my wrists and my knees because I was having a lot of joint problems and inflammation. I was really struggling with migraines and a lot of things with my health at the time. Which I don't know, I was like 21 or something like that. And like my doctor's like, you're premenopausal. And I was like, I don't know. It was weird. I was having a weird time with my body. And I was sitting there really happy. I was like harvesting some zucchinis and some lettuce and some onions and different stuff. And I was thinking about what I was going to make for dinner. And I was like, okay, and I got to run by the co-op before I get home to like get the tempeh, like the protein that I was going to have for my meal. And I turn around and there's this rabbit just ravaging this head of lettuce right behind me. And I was like, I like chased it off. And then I was like, you know, that would have been like my protein. Like that would have been like the garden source of the protein for my meal. And then I wouldn't have to like stop anywhere and buy anything that's, you know, in plastic or whatever. And it was little things like that that kind of was like, here, but what about this? You know, because you couldn't tell me anything. And I'm sure a lot of people feel that way. What I will say though is I'm thankful for that journey. I'm thankful for that time in my life. I'm thankful for the opportunity to really get a strong adjustment with my relationship to animal foods in a way that, you know, it allowed me to explore the possibilities of all these other plant foods and stuff like that. But when I came back to this realization that, you know, because of this knowledge of how fertility works and how plants interact with animals and how topsoil is made, how nutrients cycle throughout the landscape, that is really what opened me up to revisiting animal foods again. And at that time, I didn't have a lot of skills with cooking meat, and I still feel like I'm catching up with that sometimes. And because of that, I mean, I don't have the health issues that I had before. I also don't struggle with disordered eating in the way that I did when I was eating these really restrictive diets. I think that we don't talk about that enough, and it's hard to talk about. But anytime that we are on a strict diet that especially excludes an entire food group, we have to talk about that and how our relationship to food and our relationship to our bodies are really behaving. Because it was this constant like shame, guilt-based, weird like identity around it, like all this stuff that was unnecessary, that was actually pretty harmful, to get to this point where actually what I eat depends on where I live, and that's what we should be shooting for. And in a temperate climate,
yeah. Well, I was just gonna say, because there's something, I live in New Orleans, which is like known for being one of the, best food cities in the whole world, right? And part of the reason that the food is so good is because everything grows here. It's the swamp. So it's just like fertile land, and so much grows here. And so much of the food that everyone thinks is so delicious is food that this is just the food they had access to. The crawfish are just bugs, like sea bugs, and making jambalaya is just like all the different things that they had access to that they would put together, and they would make it exciting in whatever ways that they could, And so all this food, it's like any art form, really, like any roots music or roots art form, like develops from this, the connection to people who are actually on the land, living on the land, experiencing it. And then, they create something really beautiful out of it, which it seems like that's kind of how you operate in a lot of ways. Like, again, I point to the fact that whenever I talk to you, you're always like, and like see the things you share on the internet, it's like pictures of your food, pictures of food other people made for you, like getting really excited about the dish that you just made, or like the creativity that comes with having the structure and the limitations maybe of, what you have access to on the land around you. I don't know. I just think it's a cool and beautiful part of you that I wanted to bring out.
Yeah, and what that reminds me of is this thing that I always say, like in our newsletters and stuff, is that food is the love language of the earth to our bodies. And when we're able to eat food that is of our place, that is not based on extraction, that is not imported over thousands of food miles, that is fresh in that moment, it's of that moment and that place, you get this like clear feeling of being full in a way that like we can't talk about food without talking about hunger, right? And so many people are hungry, like just physically, literally, like dealing with hunger in the world. And also people that aren't even dealing with physical feelings of hunger are hungry for connection, are hungry for creativity, for their place, for all of these things that like food intersects at. And just on the plate, at that point, you've got culturally relevant food traditions that are literally, feeding deep parts of you that are not even visible. All of those things, all those strings. It's cultural. It's yeah. I know.
I love hearing you talk about that though, because, how you talk about your relationship, like, I know you are a very radical person, and you have a deep sense of responsibility, which when we thought you were a Capricorn rising made sense because you have Saturn ruling your rising, but you're also an Aquarius rising and you still have Saturn ruling your rising. It's just in this like different way. And so I see the deep sense of responsibility, and you're right about all the things that you're like, you've confronted. And I want to ask more a little bit about your veganism journey, which you touched on a little bit, but like, there's also this side of you that like has a deep, like emotional connection to the land and to food and to nurturing your community and to your relationships and all of that stuff. And that's like fun and creative. Like you're also a really fun and creative person in that way. So, I just think that there's a crossover here, you know what I mean? Like there's the duty and the responsibility side of it. And then there's also like the part of you that's just a very like, you like you said, you like to eat, you like food, and you see how that joy like connects to the sense of responsibility. You know what I mean?
You're getting me emotional. Thank you. I mean, that's really so kind, and feels really lovely to hear. I just like to party, and I don't know. I love having
You're
people
very
out to
fun.
the
You are a fun
farm, and
person.
I love like sharing food that we grow here and sharing seedlings. We have a seedling sale coming up, and so people will send me like the pictures of their gardens and stuff, and it will really like bring me to tears. Like, and yeah, I mean, it's just so fun, and like we get to this point where it's like it's so human to connect over these things, food and being outside and all of it, really.
And maybe there's a world where like people who feel, it seems like part of your journey has been in trying to make it accessible for other people because it's something that you have had to work to access. And like part of the accessibility, I think, because, you have been someone who like, I'm someone who I've always said I don't have a green thumb. Like I'm not very good at like, I feel so guilty about my relationship with plants. I can do a peace lily. Me and peace lilies get along really well. You know what I'm saying? But like, I've always been like adjacent to all these people, a lot of herbalists and stuff in my life. And you've always been one that has been made it very accessible and very like not something I'm like scared to ask basic questions or like anything like that. And I think part of that is because you are fun and you do make it fun, and like, and helping people to connect with it from a real level of um, like we all eat, we all like good food, you know what I'm saying? And it can be a creative, connective, relational, process. And if we can come to at it from that understanding that it's just like a very human thing to be in connection with the land in this way, it's more accessible. Like it just gets us past this like colonial mindset, honestly, that we have that like there's people that do that and then we pay them to do that. And then we're separated from,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and to pull on that string that you just brought up about colonialism and our relationship with death. I mean, feeling guilt about plants that have died or haven't thrived and all those sorts of things. Well, I mean, I can tell you that anyone who's learned how to grow something has killed way, 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 way more plants than someone who doesn't feel confident in their ability to grow it. I'm serious. Like I'm serious about, greenhouse management and planting and all the stuff that we do. And at the same time, like death is a partner in that. That's
Yeah.
part of what also sort of was a part of the splintering for me when I started eating animal foods, and raising them and learning about them was that, as a vegan vegetarian, for me, I was doing it more out of an ethical reason, and a lot of people have different reasons. A lot of people say I'm vegan vegetarian for health or for the ecology or for the animal welfare. Like I was definitely on the ethics side of that. And what I realized from farming and the relationships that are possible to have with these animals that we've co-evolved with that are domesticated now is that death isn't just what we are shown by capitalism and colonialism. It's not an enemy that we can fight. It's like a given, and so much of people's relationship with death is of severe trauma and loss and injustice and then capitalism, I mean, just like bastardizes death to the point where as children growing up and all those things, like what we learn about death is that it's an enemy. You get cancer and you've got to fight to beat it. You get like everyone is just supposed to live forever when we all know that we can't. And being able to sit with death whether it's literal physical death of an animal or a plant, or whatever. Like, that is part of the deal of being alive. And we just have this time here to hopefully change our relationship with death, whether that is through farming, whether that is through food, whether that is through folks doing end of life care, death doula, like, and there's a little bit of that in birth work too, like you're surrendering to the mystery and to the chaos of the things that you can't control. And we got to make friends with it, because what happens when we do make friends with death is that we can improve the outcomes for the animals that we eat. So if we're actually going to invest in the animals that are being raised in rotational pastures that are actually outside, like doing their biological behaviors, they thrive. They have a life of quality and a life of dignity that is in right relationship with the land. We thrive by having this nutrient dense, soul filling food of the land where we are. And that's all death, baby. Compost is death. It's all fertility. We got to make death fertile again. We got to and take it back from the people who are using it as a weapon. We have to take back death from being this capital controlled thing. Like, the only death that's okay is when, police officers are shooting people on the street or committing genocide in parts of the world like Gaza and Sudan and all these places where, there's definitely a reason to have a problem with death. And a lot of people are dealing with trauma and loss because of it. And it's very challenging to talk about these things because of that. So I appreciate the opportunity to talk about that here with you all, because it's something that I usually don't really bring up. Like, I'm not serving hot takes about death. Like, I'm not, people have to come to this conversation and be willing to see the value in having it. And it's the same with vegans and vegetarians. If I offended anyone or struck a chord with anyone out there who's currently vegan and vegetarian or thinking about going vegan vegetarian, I'm just sending a lot of love and empathy and realizing, holding space for my early 20s, like super, like, I was in my Drop Dead t-shirt and I was like, yeah, fuck humanity. I was in a very like misanthropic place too. And I was not going to listen. Like, if that part of me was listening right now, I would not be with it. So I also just want to validate like where people are at too, It's a good place to start. And the thing about vegans and vegetarians is they are some of the rare people that we have in the world today that will take new information in and then allow it to guide their choices and allow it to change them. And that in and of itself is super, super valuable. And they're right about the problem. We're just not getting the solution right when we don't have the knowledge and experience and understanding of how ecologies work and the exchange between animals and humans.
Really appreciate that you, throughout this interview, I feel like you're just contending with these complex things and thinking about all the things that you're passionate about in ways where there's just a lot of nuance that it seems like you've learned over the years through your experiences, through interacting with other people. So just wanted to like appreciate that. And as you were going on your hot take about death, I was writing down the things you were saying. I usually will like take notes during podcast episodes because there's like things that people say, like Dani or Emily or our guests, just really resonate with me. So I just appreciate like that perspective really resonated and shifted with me as someone who really does see death as a generative force and like something that's really powerful to work with. And so just this idea of like reclaiming it and thinking it, how necessary it is, and farming and like working in relationship with the earth, it's just like something that we can't change. And so how we see it and perceive it and work with it really does impact like our relationship with it. So last question I have for you, Rox, is you talked a lot about your experiences, not just with farming, but like community and how you impact other people in relationships that you have, friendships that you have. And so is there anything that you want to share that lights you up about these experiences of being involved in community and how they've shaped your journey?
Yeah, I've learned a lot in the last decade from living and working with other first generation, you know, mostly millennial folks in skill sharing spaces and in farming and in organizing as well. And I think that I'm ready to break up with the idea of altruism and building lasting change based on just pure altruism. I think that's where we get a lot of, you know, like white guilt type things or like virtue signaling type shit or like really surface level like commitment and involvement in things. And I think that we need to really lean into mutualism. And we really need to also at the same time, while we're working in these collaborations and, you know, whether it's farming together, living together, collaborating, you know, organizing a farmer's market or a conference or doing whatever it is that we're doing, mutual aid projects and stuff, we really need to ground it in, you know, seeing not just the form, but the function of things. So you might have an idea of like, this is what my farm's going to look like someday, but you got to break it down into like, what function is it serving within like the community, the ecosystem, you know, who's already there, what's already being done, who was there historically and who has, you know, who has a right to these things. Like there's finally a movement now around, you can basically pay an elective tax. So if you are a white person on stolen land, as I am, you can elect to pay a tax to your local tribal council. If you already are doing it to the state and all of that is going to war and genocide and all that shit, like let's at least, you know, replicate that same model and put it somewhere that's actually building and protecting sovereignty for Native folks. So within the historical context of the land as well. And with the future, you know, what does this farm look like? What does this community look like? What does this project look like without me, after me? You know, and so much of the time I see great stuff going down because people are just willing to let things die with them. And we have to be willing as you know, we can't claim that we're elders right now, but like we have to learn a lot from the elders that we have, the elders that have come before us in terms of what to do and what not to do as we, you know, hopefully like in a perfect ideal scenario, if we're successful, then we will become elders and we will have future generations also still committed to these projects of food sovereignty and just like freedom of human beings on the land, return of human beings to the land, which the removal of humans from the land is the part and parcel of colonialism, right? I mean, no matter where you are, no matter where you came from, your lineage and whatever, like all people were once indigenous somewhere in their lineage. And at some point, if we look at all the myriad of reasons that people are removed from the land, a lot of it comes back to colonialism. So
The
we're
original
trying
wound.
to, yes, the original wounds, yes. So I think that we're able to accomplish a lot together when we look at things collaboratively and when we look at things and how they impact and open up opportunities for more folks in community and the skill sharing thing and the food thing. And like, these are things that communities have been built around and co-evolved with from the beginning. So it kind of just comes, I mean, it's really sort of like a byproduct, kind of like how you get, you know, you might be making butter and you get some whey and like that whey is really nourishing, it turns out, and has lots of uses in cooking and buttermilk pancakes, you know, like let's just keep this all going while we're rooted in the nourishment, while we're all being nourished and nourishing nourishers. Yeah, that's the goal. We all do better when we all do better.
Amen. So beautifully said, Rox. I feel like now would be the perfect time. Let's share your chart. You've shared such insightful, beautiful, like just insights, experiences. Yeah, let me
ready with the quotes. I got some quotes written down.
Heck yes. So just give me a moment. Queuing up Rox's chart. Let's get into the astrology of it all, because that's what we love to do here. So, Aryn or Dani, would you like to just maybe for folks who are listening and not seeing us, visually describe what you're seeing in Rox's chart? And I'll use my little pointer dot here for people who are watching to follow along with this little black dot.
Yeah. Can I do it? Is that okay, Aryn? Okay. So let's start with the sun. So the sun is over here in the 6th house in Cancer. We have also Venus next to the sun. And then a little farther away, but still present, is the South Node, all in Cancer. And then we have opposite of the sun. I just want to point this out. We have looks like Uranus and Neptune. Again, it's not a super close orb, but I would consider it to be impacting the Sun Venus South Node thing going on. The Uranus and Neptune conjunction in Capricorn in the 12th house. And then Rox's rising sign is in Aquarius at 23 degrees, close to the rising sign in the it's at 17 degrees. Sorry, I'm thinking my own thing. Close to the rising sign at 17 degrees is Saturn. So we have this Saturn impact at home in Aquarius, which is one of the signs that Saturn rules. And there's so much of that for Rox coming out in this discussion that we had today. And then the last one is in this beautiful 5th house Gemini moon that I want to point out, at 20 degrees of Gemini. And again, it's in the 5th house. It's hard for me to see. Is there money aspects to it? It doesn't look to be super. Oh, yep. There we go. Nope, actually no. So it looks like it's like pretty well like left alone.
Let's say a trine to Rox's ascendant at 23 degrees of Aquarius, and a trine to Saturn. But trines are nourishing, expansive.
Well aspected. Yeah, we call it well aspected moon. So this moon is important, I think, too. And some of what I was trying to bring out a little earlier about the playful side of you and the side of you that likes to party and have fun and get curious. And as Emily was describing, being able to distill large, wide ranging ideas and concepts into like easily understood pieces of information for other people to be able to process and a little more slowly. So I'll pause there. Those are like some of the main things I'm seeing. This Saturn and conjunct the rising sign, as well as the Uranus opposed Sun and Venus thing. There's this Uranus, Saturn, Aquarius impact to your chart. And maybe it's just because we just got done having a conversation about this Aquarius energy, but there's this element of responsibility and duty and understanding the old ways that's very Saturnian. Saturn also was a god of agriculture. So your rising sign being like who you are, like having Saturn right there on that rising sign, it's like who you are in the world is impacted by this Saturnian archetype. And Uranus in modern astrology is ruled by Uranus, and Uranus is the change maker and the innovator and the one that breaks Saturn's boundaries. It's the one that when we go, when we can see, in the sky, when we look in the sky, we can see Saturn, and that's it. We don't see any of the other planets with our naked eye. So when we invented the telescope and discovered Uranus, like Uranus broke our boundaries of our understanding of our universe. And so Aquarius kind of represents that, like, holding both of those things, essentially. It's both this like Saturnian, dutiful, responsible, structured, again, agriculture, putting things into an order, understanding the old ways and the old traditions, and also being a very inventive and like breaker of chains, breaker of boundaries, revolutionary, like energy that's able, and it makes it that much more genius because you have both the old wisdom and old knowledge, and you have room for the transformation of that knowledge, or the composting, as you put it, like taking the old and turning it into something new that works better for the world that we exist in today. So I'm going to pause there. I said that earlier, but I'm actually going to pause there and see if other astrologers have ideas they want to share.
I love all of that analysis. And I think I was really looking at that Mars and Taurus too, because when I think of farmer gardener energy, I think of Taurus as the archetype. Of course, not every like farmer or gardener person interested in like the earth is going to have Taurus placements. But I feel like there's something about the Mars energy, Mars being the aggressor, the action-oriented kind of energy, the sort of visceral energy, and to be in a sign like Taurus, I don't know, I just think that's such a delightful sign to have with Mars, because to me, like, Taurus is Venusian ruled, not to me in astrology, it's Venusian ruled. So there's something about like the softness and the sensuality and the again, connectedness to nourishment. I feel like, Rox, you talked a lot about this idea of nourishing yourself, others, the land, and that feels very Cancerian to me as well. And then having Taurus there too, of like the sensual pleasure of like, yes, like we're growing food because it's important. And also food tastes good and we want to share it. And there's a connective element to it. And so
And
I think
also
Mars
treat
and
yourself. That's like that's what it sounds like when you're talking about Mars and Taurus. It's that like treat yourself energy, like the pleasure aspect.
yes, absolutely. And I think too, you have Moon in fifth house. Like I also have that natal placement too. And like I feel like the fifth house is connected to pleasure, romance, children. Just to me, I think of it as like it can be sensual pleasure and also the pleasure of play. Like we do things because we want to, because they feel good. And so I think, yes, what you mentioned is right on track. And also just there's so many elements of your chart that are just coming together in such a way where it just makes so much sense that these are the things that you're interested in and what you're drawn to. But yeah, I wanted to highlight that Taurian energy because I feel like there's, yes, like, of course, like the Mars and Taurus, like is willing to put in the work and take time. Like it's a fixed sign. It's something that like really can sink its teeth into it. Like when it really cares about something. And, having the rising fixed sign of Aquarius is also helpful in terms of that, just that like internal energy that you can draw to sustain yourself. Yeah.
And also the Cancer Sun conjunct Cancer Venus too, in the sixth house of like service and workers and, stuff like that, and like your everyday work. To me, there's also an element of pleasure that comes in there, and like a relational energy that comes in there. And, it also, to me, Venus rules Taurus. So there's the relationship with that Taurus Mars as well. And the Cancer-Taurus relationship is really a beautiful relationship. Like Moon rules Cancer and is exalted in Taurus. So there is definitely that sextile, that connection there between the two. Really a lot to do with nourishment and food and all of that.
Yeah, I was going to point out that Venus in Cancer here is ruling that Taurus Mars. And I just, I have Cancer and Taurus energy in my own chart. So I really resonate with this aspect of your chart, Rox. But I also wanted to add that Venus in Cancer, that is like such a soft, sensitive, nurturing, caretaking Venus. That is beautiful, right? Like a beautiful Venus that deserves fierce protection. and also a deeply emotional, right? Like a deeply intuitive Venus, and that rules your Taurus Mars. And this Taurus Mars is in the 4th house of family, foundation, and land, and ancestry, lineage. So I almost feel like this Mars is really driven by these very Cancerian archetypes, and also very emotionally driven as well, and like intuitively driven, and driven to like caretake, because that is such a Cancerian archetype. And I wanted to point out here, because you really talked about death, right? Like anyone who is in a relationship with the earth, or anyone who maybe has a very deep spiritual connection, like really at some point in the journey understands and finds a radical acceptance with death, that it's just simply part of being alive, being in a human body, being a being of earth. It is just a way of life, right? Like it's just part of the cycle. And so you have Jupiter up here, the planet of faith, of belief, of expansion, of spiritual growth, of wisdom, in the 8th house here, in the sign of Virgo. And so you have Jupiter in the 8th house. And I wanted to just ground us in what the 8th house is. We do find death and grief and loss in the 8th house. It is known as the gate to Hades, because it is the house right before the 7th house, where the sun and the planets literally set over the western horizon, or the descendant, where they descend beneath our view here on Earth. So if you have Jupiter in this house of grief and death and loss, there is almost like a profound spiritual like connection or growth in finding like a deeper meaning in death, and understanding that it is part of the cycle. And obviously in the work that you do and the path that you're called to as a steward of the earth, as a farmer, right? Like you really have a deep, intimate relationship with death as just part of the natural cycle. And I think this Jupiter, one in Virgo, in an earth sign, there's another aspect of Virgo. There is like to me, a melancholy that comes with Virgo, because seasonally Virgo is the last zodiac sign of summer. Right, that leads us into the fall equinox. And it is, yes, it's bountiful. It's the harvest time. We're harvesting all the fruits of our labor. And there's a melancholy, right, of that, like that growing season is ending. And we're getting into the time of year where it's time to compost. So you just really have this like profound connection to death and cycles. And it's really amplified to me by your Jupiter in Virgo that's also in the 8th house. And then my other favorite aspect of the 8th house, because I'm in an 8th house year right now, and I'm like so deep in the 8th house, is collaboration, mutual aid. It's us merging with the relationships we have in the 7th house, which is our one-on-one relationships. It's how we merge together. It's how we collaborate. It's how we co-create. It's like how we bind and merge together emotionally, just like all those things. And so because you're really radical in your beliefs, right? Like you are a radical farmer, you're a community organizer, and you really care about, showing up for people, caring for people, being a contributor to a vibrant local food hub, which also like is an act of service, Virgo, and an act of mutual aid to contribute to a hyper local food system. And I know, right, like I've read on your website, like that you do have programs in place, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, but like that you can accept, I believe, like food stamps at some of the farmers markets. Is that correct? Or, other options to make the food that you grow more accessible to people who might not have the access to income to buy a share outright. What I want to make sure I'm not misrepresenting that, though.
Yeah, I can clarify that. So we do accept WIC vouchers at farmers markets, and we are members of Fair Share Coalition. They're a nonprofit who does all the work to raise funds to do a cost share program for low income folks to access CSA while the farmers still get paid. and they process EBT for farmers who are members. So we can accept EBT as payment for our CSA. I just got back from Marble Sea Conference where we had a half a day with all the producers and the food aggregators. So a lot of food pantries, some churches, things like that have been in the Local Food Purchasing Assistance Program, LFPA. And that was really fantastic to see. All the folks, the Hmong community was well represented there. There were some Latinx farmers there as well. And all of the communities that the LFPA project has impacted has been really wonderful to see. We put I think they ended up with $4.6 million of food distributed from these small farmers to all of these food aggregators, food hubs, and pantries. So that was really cool. It's been a real honor to be in the LFPA program. I recommend it for small and beginning farmers because it's a very flexible program. But unfortunately, we'll see what happens with the funding as far as that goes. But those are our current efforts for food accessibility and food sovereignty, and to make the food that we grow as accessible as possible. We're not necessarily out here as market gardeners just growing the highest price point crops that we can sell for the best price available. Of course, we have to do some of that to pay the bills, and people that have money to pay for those things, that are happy to pay for them. I'm thankful for them as well, because we wouldn't be here without that support. But we're always looking to the future in terms of this is a space that constantly needs work, that constantly needs improvement. And my biggest goal and hope for the food sovereignty conversation is for more direct land access within communities. So it's not just working with the producers that are here, it's also increasing direct access for people through land and inland work.
And that is so, like you said, this is a space that constantly needs work and constantly needs to be reassessed. And if that doesn't scream Virgo 8th house, the Virgo urge to get it right and do it again and again and again until it's right. And the 8th house, managing resources of other people, managing community resources. It's not just about death. It's also about what we value as a group and how that's managed. And you have Jupiter there, as Emily's pointing out, which shows a relationship to death and a very Virgoan relationship to death of death is inevitable, and we need to it should be ritualized, and we need to honor it and honor the cycles. And then also a relationship to managing other people's resources, or the resources you have access to, working off of grants, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And in this Virgo way of there's a humility, there's a need to be of service, and there's a need to relook at it over and over and over again and make sure that you're doing it right from the get.
And that Jupiter in Virgo is the ruler of the MC point, which in astrology is otherwise known as the midheaven, can often be in the 10th house, or in whole sign astrology, which is what Emily's using to display this chart. Sometimes the MC point will be in different houses. And so in this way, the MC is kind of to me, I view it as it's culminative, and it's also oftentimes our life's work. And that may or may not be the work that we are paid for in capitalist systems, but it's also legacy. So Rox, just to hear all the things you just said, and to bounce off of what Emily was saying of this sort of constant refinement process, to me, that feels so central to the work that you're doing. And then it to be in Sagittarius of a sign of expansion and learning and intellectual growth as well. And then it's also making a really nice trine with Chiron in Leo and Mercury to some degree as well. So again, there's communication, there's community, there's nourishment, there's relationship. And then Chiron in the mix just also kind of that's the archetype of the wounded healer of this idea that our greatest woundings are also our gifts. So there's I don't really have too much to say about that, but just having that like asteroid in the conversation is also really interesting when you're talking about what it means to build access for people and connect to bigger communities. Like it's not just like a one person project. It's like we're all in this together. And so I just also wanted to make that point too.
Can I really quick, because I have some of these quotes I just want to like point out in the chart. Okay, so any community is going, this is stuff Rox said during our interview today that I just want to point out in the chart. Any community is going to be shaped by the people fighting for it and the people that organize for it. So obviously, like you have this Aquarius connection, you have this Saturnian connection. And then you also have a very practical connection to your community with this 8th house Jupiter stuff. Also, your Sun and Venus in the 6th house, like that's a house of service. It's Virgo's house in modern astrology. I know it's contested, but I believe I associate it with Virgo energy. So like there's an element of being of service, of like fighting for workers, etc. Food intersecting with belonging, culturally relevant food traditions, feeding deep parts of you that are not even visible. Look at this Mars in Taurus in the 4th house of like nourishment and family and home and foundations, and like how food like feeds deep parts of you. Like that's like a pretty profound like Taurus 4th house thing. Also Taurus 4th house, we got to make death fertile again. And like this Taurus Scorpio relationship, now you have Pluto and Scorpio up here. That's the Scorpio generation, that's millennials. You talk about being a millennial a lot, and I think like you're somebody who I think does really identify with that, and as do I. So I just want to point that out, that like that's that marking. It's not a super close orb to anything in the 4th house, but you do have this Scorpio Taurus axis thing going on, which is the life and death axis. It is like make death fertile again. You know what I'm saying? And also take it back from the people using it as a weapon. Like that's again more Uranus, Aquarius stuff of like, we can't let them like control us or have that power. And then we all do better. What'd you say?
I said a monopoly on death.
Yeah, exactly. And we all do better when we all do better, and that's something that is resonant, I think, in a lot of places in your chart. So I just wanted to go through some of those because I thought those were really profound and really bring out you and your work in the world. So
now I'm wondering, I'm learning so much, and I really admire the way that you all are able to look at a chart and break this down and see so much. And now I'm like wondering, when are they going to get to the good part? When are they going to get to the roast? Like, where is because we're all of us are not without our problematic shit and the things that we have to deal with in this life, and being neurodivergent, and as a lot of people are in this field, I find, with land work and food service and all that kind of stuff. Now I'm like, I know that they're leaving some out, but that's okay.
I think you're Aquarius. Well, no, here, I will say this. I think you're, part of my place in the world, like we didn't share our sun, moon, and rising, whatever, but part of my place in the world, I'm an Aries sun with a Pisces moon. I am here, and a Libra rising. So I am here to bring some balance in the form of like optimism and joy. I think like, I don't like to roast people using astrology because I think I like to be strength-based. And I will also say that there are challenges that each of these signs totally face, and that can help us to feel seen, is to feel seen in some of those challenges. I will say, like what I was talking about earlier when I was trying to get to the food stuff, you kept bringing it back to a very serious place of like, this is our duty. This is our responsibility, and that feels very Aquarius. It feels very like, I can't. And you have Chiron and Leo, okay? And opposite, it's not making a super close orb, but you do have this Chiron and Leo. And Chiron is the wounded healer. And we were just talking in our last episode about Aquarius season for Astro Church. We were just talking about how Aquarius is so good at seeing the group and knowing what's best for the group, but has trouble feeling belonging sometimes, and has trouble feeling seen by the group sometimes, and has trouble feeling like they aren't just totally different monster creature that can't get along with anybody. You know what I'm saying? Like, Leo is the one who's like in the middle of the bonfire, like entertaining everybody. Aquarius is the one who set the bonfire up and is standing on the outside being like, good, I did that, you know? And so there's an element here of like needing to, and also I will say Cancer can sometimes give and give and give and not ask for what the appreciation that they actually need. Okay. So there might be some element of like letting go of responsibility sometimes, or like needing to release the feeling of responsibility, and like needing to be like living life on hard mode. Like, that's something we talked about with Aquarius energy. Like, it can be very like hard on yourself, like making it harder on yourself because you feel like you have to or something, instead of like Leo comes in. And this is where, if you have wounding around this, like wounding around being able to experience joy, being able to play, being able to laugh, being able to feel like you belong, being able to feel like you're allowed. And I know you have your best friend is a Leo. So I know you have like Leos in your life that bring this out of you, you know, like this is your 7th house of relationships. This is like, those people are here to help you heal some of this stuff, you know? And like, also like Aquarius can have a hard time embodying that, can have a hard time letting loose, like letting themselves fall into that. And Leo's here to be like, lighten up a little bit, have some fun. Like, it's okay to like not be perfect. It's okay that you didn't solve all of the world's problems today. You know what I mean? So I will say that, like, in terms of like a roast, like that's the best I can give you.
I do think that you really hit the nail on the head there with some of that, though. And it reminds me of some conversations I was having with a farmer friend at the conference, where I was like, did you notice how clumsy I was coming into those first few workshops? Like, I had my big backpack and I was like, whoa. I was like knocking down my water bottle and stuff. And I'm like so clumsy and awkward because there's this like, I think I was relating it to class and like feeling like when I'm in a really big fancy building, or I'm at someone's house that's like really super nice, then a lot of times I do feel very like a freakish monster. Like, even though I know that like it's okay that I'm here and I'm choosing to be here and like I know the reasons why I'm here, I still very much relate to that like awkwardness and that like, I don't know, it's hard to name, but yeah, that's interesting that you called that out. Feels very true.
Very Aquarian, that like just so very Aquarian. So I feel like this is such a good place to kind of transition just into wrapping this amazing interview up. So
yeah. So Rox, is there anything else that you'd like to add or share with our listeners today?
Well, it didn't come up very much, but I'm thinking about the things that I have to offer folks around the farming stuff. So I have to mention the regenerative poultry affinity group that I'm in the process of organizing right now. I will be hopefully implementing, well, no, I am. It's just a matter of how long it takes me, but implementing this tree range poultry system on the new farm. And I'm coordinating with other farmers in the area that are aspiring regenerative agroforestry poultry-based farmers, and those who are already raising chickens that might want to incorporate agroforestry in their methods. So we're looking at, not just the skill sharing, but also the access to the FSA loans. They're doing a lot of advocacy around that to educate the loan officers about what this is and how this works and the data and all the stuff. As well as, potential for equipment sharing. You need a truck, you need crates, you need like so much stuff in order to like actually raise like 1,000 to 1,500 birds per flock. 3 times a year. So I'm really looking forward to, how that's shaping up and who's showing up to the table with that. We've been talking a lot with Martise and Amy Scales of Full Circle Healing Farms. So I want to shout them out as well. And I'm just here for folks who want to talk to me. Like if there's something that came up, like I know that some of it is pretty heavy stuff. Or if there's something that like I can help somebody with around, food or farming, if you're looking for opportunities, ways to get started, or just learning more, just reach out to me. Like I'm here and I work 7 days a week for 20 weeks of the growing season, but I will get back to you on stuff. So yeah.
I love that. Where can people do that, Rox? Like, where can people connect with you and your work, as well as how would you prefer people to reach out to you if they have those questions or thoughts?
Yeah, so I'm stepping away from the Meta apps, and it's going pretty well. You can still find me on Instagram at Farmer Rox Writes. I will put all these links for the show notes at the end. But primarily, I'm active on Blue Sky, Farmer Rox Writes on Blue Sky, Farmer Rox Writes on Substack. Follow our farm if you're in the Milwaukee area, especially. We have lots of like a seedling sale coming up. We have lots of cool opportunities for work shares and things like that coming up. Winterspringcsa.com, and then all the socials are available there as well.
Thank you, Rox. This has been such an amazing interview. It is just a blessing to have you in as a community member, as our first external interview guest. So thank you for the work that you do. And just thank you, everyone, for listening. Thank you to our community for tuning in. And this has been another episode of Soul Connections, and we'll see you next time.
Bye, y'all.